Hey, so America's on fire right now.
Hmm.
And you're listening to this broadcast, this bonus episode of Real Sankara Hours. Um, yeah, right in the middle of a maelstrom of shit going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say this is the biggest social unrest since 1968.
Yep.
Um, it's kind of funny when we recorded the episode I mean, that was last Wednesday,
Yeah.
right? And it was like you were bringing it up, and I was like, oh yeah, this stuff again, and then I didn't realize. I mean, I think literally as soon as we stopped recording is when
Yeah.
is when the shit really started to pop off, and I didn't expect it to get that big and that militant that quickly.
Right.
Um, I don't
Yeah.
know if anyone did.
I mean I when we recorded I knew like people were, protesting in Minneapolis, but when we recorded I didn't know like it was going to get as big as it is now, where there's like yeah, you basically have like the largest like sort of domestic uprising, you're right, since 1968. And we're recording this on May 31st, 2020. This is Real Sankara Hours bonus episode, after hours content for our lovely patrons. um Tonight um we're going to read For a Revolutionary Position on the Negro Question by Harry Haywood, a black communist who was a member of the CPUSA. This came out in 1958. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah. I Harry Haywood's definitely one of my faves. I don't think I'd read this one, but I'd read some of his stuff earlier. Uh, but you know, perhaps there's a tendency to look at this stuff as outdated, but I was surprised at exactly
oh,
how relevant a lot of it is, including like the direct questions of self-determination.
oh,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
so we'll get into that, but I guess first a little background. Harry Haywood was born in 1898. Wow. To former slaves. I mean, he grew up very working class. He joined the Communist Party like in the 20s. Um, and yeah, I mean, he actually went to Moscow, and I think he was there. He was there like when Trotsky got kicked out of the party, and
Whoa.
he actually like wrote up a whole thing about it, which is actually it's very interesting, you know, to read sort of the perspective of like just a regular person, especially like a black American in, the Communist Party at the time, because, I'm not going to get into all that, but he was very much like uh yeah, he he was very much like trained in, in the 1920s. The Soviet Union had like opened a bunch of schools that were basically like revolutionary schools, and people could come all across the world
Hmm.
to study and literally learn how to do revolution, and like learn Marxism as a science, but also like how to run a printing press, how to like withstand torture, I mean, like real stuff.
Damn.
And so he was in the Comintern, and he was a big part in developing the Black Belt thesis, which was the Communist Party's position on, what they called the Negro Question, aka, race, institutional racism, oppression. Um, and the Communist Party at the time stood out because it was basically the only political organization in the country, the only like, I guess, multiracial one that like took a revolutionary position on, the issue of racism, in that it wasn't just a problem of equal rights and discrimination, but they understood that African Americans constituted an oppressed nation,
Yeah.
and a big part of the Third International, the Comintern, and Stalin himself pushed the CPUSA specifically, and also just communist parties in general, to focus on oppressed colonized nations as sort of having the real revolutionary potential, especially after all the potential revolutions in Western Europe flamed out, and so that's what like these international schools were about, and he was big in the Scottsboro Boys case, which was one of the first sort of like international news, like legal cases about black men being falsely accused of things and denied justice.
And I think this was very apropos to choose this to read, Peter, like especially right now, because like I said in the previous episode we recorded, and it's something that it's a point I want to keep making, because I think like it's something that gets lost in the discourse on race, because even Harry Haywood mentioned this, that he basically mentioned that Black America, African Americans, the American Negro, whatever name, I mean, like there was the American Negro, and like during Haywood's time, then there's like African American, and by the way, the first term, like I think some black folks get divided on the term African American, but the first uses of the term African American was during the American Revolution, actually in the 1700s. That was the first time the term African American was used, and basically like African American identity is an ethnic and national identity. Even if you go on Wikipedia, it says like African Americans are an ethnic group in the United States. So like, it's not a controversial position to say that like, African Americans, Black America, or this thing we call blackness or negritude, it's not just some sort of vague thing. Like it's an actual real thing with components to it. And I think like that's something that gets lost. And so like like when you think of national identity, national ethnic identity, it's shared ancestry, common history, heritage, common culture, and cultures like music, food, way of life, those sorts of things. Like those are the sorts of things that like they're, the thing about culture is like it's very subtle, but it when you see it. Like it when you go from one culture to another, that things are different, right? Like people just have different ways of life. And so even the United Nations actually in the UN Charter recognizes the right of self-determination for nations of people.
Well, yes. Yeah, and the Soviet Union had a big hand in getting the UN to even acknowledge that. So specifically this essay, which was longer than I thought it was, honestly. Yeah, it's very like 60 long. Pages. But
it's good.
He wrote it in 1957, and at that point, like, so basically the Communist Party had turned into like a pretty significant political force by the 1930s, and was very instrumental in getting the New Deal to happen. And people, whenever sort of social democrat types talk about like, oh yeah, we just need like a new Roosevelt, new Deal. I mean, you only got the New Deal because you had like an active and effective Communist Party.
Just two things before we forget. But the Communist Party also did play a big role in organizing black people in the South against Jim Crow racial segregation. And also at the time, this is really important in terms of chronology, Harry Haywood is writing this, I think like 57, 58, around there, like right around that time. I guess it was published multiple times, something like that. But yeah, somewhere like, basically.
He wrote it in 57.
Yeah, okay. So like basically like mid to late 50s around there. And in 1955 was the Supreme Court decision of Brown v. Board of Education. I think 1955
Yeah.
or 1954.
I think I think it's 54. He gets
Right.
into that a lot, and
Yeah.
some things that I didn't quite that
So
were new for
yeah.
me. But just to finish the background. So the after in the war there was sort of a united front because basically people the Comintern, which ended up being disbanded during the war, because as partly as a way to ally with the U.S. Yeah, there was a united front, so basically it was like, yeah, so everyone has to team up to defeat fascism and the Nazis, and of course the Soviet Union bore most of the brunt, but for the CPUSA it was much more of a integration. It worked its way into higher levels of government, and sort of famously Henry Wallace, Roosevelt's vice president, was pretty friendly with them. But after the war is when you got McCarthyism, right? And there was this, when the Cold War set in, the U.S. government went after the CPUSA pretty hard, and and also at the same time, after Stalin died and Khrushchev came to power, he did the whole secret speech denouncing Stalin and basically kind of abandoning any sort of support of any revolutionary movements in the United States. It basically worked out what they called peaceful coexistence. So that really kind of left the CPUSA hanging, and I think part of that, I guess in their defense for their kind of shameless revisionism in this regard, was that they kind of are doing everything they could to barely survive. I guess, I don't know. But what happened was basically in the 50s, and this was what prompted him to write this essay, is that the CPUSA basically dissolved all the work they were doing organizing black workers and fighting for that, and basically said we'll let the NAACP's in charge of anything related to black people, and we're just going to follow them and do what they do. And and Harry Haywood did not, I mean, he really didn't appreciate this, and he thought it was a disgrace, and eventually he got kicked out of the party over this. But he also wrote this piece sort of explaining that the question of self-determination is still one of vital importance for the Black freedom struggle. So that's what it was about. And what was your? Because this is probably a little more Soviet. This is probably a little more Marxist than I don't know. What was your opinion of it? What was your initial take?
I liked it. I thought. Yeah, I mean, I think it makes he makes a strong case for black self-determination. I just want to Brown v. Board of Education, just to backtrack, it was 1954, and it was the Supreme Court decision that outlawed racial segregation in public schools. It basically said public schools that are racially segregated are unconstitutional, even if the schools are otherwise equal. So Plessy versus Ferguson, which was 1898, established the whole separate but equal, that basically the South used that precedent to say we can have racial segregation as long as we can argue that the facilities are equal in quality, basically. But what happened is that in the South, and this actually ties into what Haywood is saying, particularly about the plantation economy of the South, which is that the thing about Jim Crow is I think people think that it was just purely about separation for separation's sake, but the separation was meant to preserve the old plantation economy during slavery. So
Yeah.
it's like okay, so we're not. It's basically okay. Slavery's outlawed, but we'll still have these same, basically like fucked up plantation economy that exploits black labor, and so the South was used separate but equal to justify those essentially like racial apartheid practices in south of the Mason-Dixon. So Brown v. Board of Education was saying that okay, even if the schools are equal in quality, separation is still wrong. Which
they do make this. I don't remember the entire specific legal argument that's made. That does kind of make sense. But I mean, I also don't really care. The Supreme Court. I think one of the things that he mentioned, that I found fascinating was he basically, he was quoting the president of Howard University, but he was saying, basically, because like this, people act like the Supreme Court is this sort of independent judiciary that doesn't get politically involved ever, and it's not the case at all. I mean, the cases the Supreme Court takes and the decisions they make are fully made with an understanding of like the political landscape and I think that's basically true for every court. I mean, that whole sort of that whole civic, people really got to get out of the idea that like what you learned in civics class or AP Gov really has anything to do with the reality of, how any of these institutions work. But so,
sorry, just to cut you up. The reason why I just want to say, just to make this one quick point, the reason why I mentioned the Brown v. Board is because I think this ties into Haywood's point, which is I think he's sort of carving out a different position than just pro-segregation or anti-segregation. And I think that's what I found interesting, is that because I think what he was saying, what he's basically getting at is that like even if you integrate, it's not going to be enough for black freedom. There has to be real self-determination, and I think like I can tell throughout his piece he was basically poking holes in the I think like basically the liberal integration consensus that was emerging, particularly from groups like the NAACP. Like the NAACP,
he goes hard at the NAACP.
Yeah, because there was basically like I was involved in the NAACP in college, and like it is I mean it has its ups and downs, but like the good thing I will say about the NAACP is that they're nonpartisan. Like they don't do official national endorsements, but it is it is, but always has been a very bourgeois reformist organization in terms of its politics. Like that's just I'm not even trying to make a moral statement. It's just like that's just what it is as an organization. So Harry Haywood, I can tell, like he was basically poking holes at the NAACP liberal integrationist, which really meant assimilation. Like I think the integration meant assimilation, and
he was very clear about that.
Yeah, I actually want to bring up before I forget this quote from Adam Clayton Powell that I think ties into here it is. So Adam Clayton Powell was a black congressman from Harlem, and he was very instrumental in getting a lot of desegregation bills passed. But even he was critical of integration, and he was actually like, honestly, if you listen to his speeches, he was way like, to the left of a lot of black politicians. So in his autobiography, Atom by Atom, which I think again like ties into what Haywood's saying, he says about black power, he says blacks must distinguish between desegregation and integration. Desegregation removes all barriers and facilitates access to an open society. Integration accomplishes the same thing, but has a tendency to denude the Negro of pride in himself. Blacks must seek desegregation, thereby retaining pride and participation in their own institutions, just as other groups, the Jews, Irish, Italians, and Poles, have done. Negroes are the only group in America that has utilized the word integration in pursuing equality. So it's a very like different argument that I think like because Adam Clayton Powell was not a communist, but I think he has very similar critiques of the liberal integration approach to equality that Haywood has. It's just Haywood has a Marxist, explicitly Marxist take, but I think like there's a what I found fascinating is that like there's a critique of the liberal integration approach to getting equality, quote unquote, for Black people. But that's like that's what I found.
Well, I think that like integration wasn't really that popular amongst like the working class.
Right.
And I mean but I just wanted to say this one quote about Brown vs. Board, which is Harry Haywood quotes the president of Howard, who said that there's no question that the Supreme Court decision against segregation was dictated by international considerations. Before the American people even knew it, it had been translated into 40 languages. One would conclude from this that the power of world socialism wrested this concession from American ruling circles. Yeah. Heavy.
Yeah.
I
actually want to dig into that quote because I think what was going on, if I remember, this was a long piece. I think Haywood since said this, but at the time, like Eisenhower, who was president at the time, like he had to basically make the case internationally that the United States is a leader of the free world. But he had to wrestle that PR with the reality of racial segregation in the United States. And so basically, like, this is the thing, like, the reason why I mentioned Brown v. Board is, like, you know, as I was telling you, Peter, like, at this time, this is when you begin to see the real political fault lines emerge when it comes to liberal versus conservative. And basically the fault line revolves around the question of integration of Black people into American society. And, like, and this is where that fault line begins to really, really emerge. So like the fucking divides that we talk about in liberal versus conservative, like it's all about basically integration and assimilation of Black people and minorities, racial minorities, into America. Like that's the real question. Like it's not about taxes or big government or all the other shit. It's about integration. I think the president of Howard, like that was interesting that in some ways, like there was a international PR considerations at play.
There was no really such thing as a conservative Republican until '64 with Goldwater, and Barry Goldwater was specifically running against the Civil Rights Act.
Right, exactly. And that was basically the birth of what we consider the modern day Republican Party in terms of its politics.
Yeah, up until that point, it's basically just a bourgeois party of like northern capitalists, right? You know, Rockefeller famously. But yeah, very much. It was very much a perfect storm in the sense of like the U.S. had to, you know, part of its propaganda was to, you know, part of its Cold War propaganda is that it's the leader of democracy and freedom. And of course, the main problem with that is the entire racialized caste of people who, you know, are legally denied, you know, any freedom or democracy. And so, you know, and the Soviet Union wasn't quiet about that either. And so, but, you know, they couldn't just, you know, concede it outright, and they had to do it in a way that didn't embolden communism. One of the things they did was they got like whatever the hot jazz musicians. I think Louis Armstrong went on one of these, and maybe James Brown whenever he came up. They get like goodwill tours where basically they would like tour you know, Europe and be like, yeah, no, America's great, no racism here, we love it. There
are a lot of jazz musicians who were basically just doing U.S. propaganda during the Cold War. Jazz music was like,
and also like despite inheriting basically the entire like imperial capitalist system from the British Empire after World War II, the U.S. like basically positioned itself as like, yeah, no, we don't like colonialism either. We're like an anti, we were a decolonized country. I mean, they literally like tried to say like, yeah, the American Revolution was an anti-colonial revolution and shit like that. We just don't like communism, and they really made it seem like it was just like, yeah, no, we don't have a problem with like national independence. It's just this thing we have where we just really don't like communism.
Yeah. Yeah, and there
And
was
so
like
so it was like a perfect storm that the CPUSA would basically abandon any advocating for, the black working class and cede the ground to the NAACP. And with that, basically abandoning any understanding of the black working class as having a central role in the black freedom struggle. And that, I didn't realize that, like, how direct a move that was. And it actually, like, it explains a whole lot, especially as, like, when you grow up, if you grow up, like, and you learn, like whatever they teach you in February, or if you watch Eyes on the Prize, the documentary. And it is very much like, yeah, no, there's never any, like, labor questions, really. It's never really about that. It's always, like, yeah, people in suits, demanding, the ability to drink out certain water fountains. And that was the whole thing, but that was not the thing at all. And they very much basically had to, like, demobilize the black American working class, in order to achieve the civil rights reforms.
Yeah, and I'm looking through like he's really
he's very
I think
thorough.
I think like what was interesting is because I just finished Black Bourgeoisie by E. Franklin Frazier, and that was basically like
Which he shouts out.
Yeah, and like he there's a sort of subheader in his essay, is the Negro movement mainly a bourgeois effort? And it's like, yeah, like there's always been, and I think like we're going to have to, I think like this definitely applies to today, and I think you can even see it, like you can see this fault line here now with the riots, is that like there is a certain segment of the black community, like a small segment, like even during slavery there was a small segment of what you call free people of color, who were freed, who were black people who were not slaves, who lived in the North and had some degree of access to white society. But they still, because they were black, and blackness meant slave in America, like there's always a risk that they could be kidnapped and get sent back and get sent into slavery. So they didn't really have like equal rights the way that whites did, even though like they could live in the same space as white people. I think there was like a riot, like there was I think there was some riot in American history where basically like white people burned down this building that was used by black abolitionists. So yeah, like they had to face shit like that. So but at the same time, like there are some what you call like black upper class bourgeoisie, boule, whatever you want to say, who always acted as representatives of black people because they had immediate access to white society. But the thing is, like, a lot of them were always very disconnected from black people.
I mean that the black bourgeois class didn't really have a whole lot of power in the 19th and early 20th century. There really wasn't that much of them, and the power, I mean, really came from an organized working class. That's really like that was really the mobilization that achieved any sort of gains post Civil War. Let me find...
I want to like kind of just finish the point, like because like even there's that class element, that class divide has always existed within black America, even going back to slavery. And so like after slavery, like those like the sort of A. Franklin Frazier goes in like how like the black middle class or upper class kind of changes over time from slavery then to the Jim Crow era, and then like to because actually Fraser wrote the book right around the same time that Haywood publishes this. So 1957. So this is like like a very pivotal time in American history. Like there was like a kind of development of the black upper middle class during Jim Crow, who like, I mean, they weren't really like a bourgeoisie, like they didn't own as much capital as white society. That's the thing, but they overinflated how much wealth and power they had. But Fraser points out, like, actually wasn't that much. Like they like they have money, but not like they're not swimming in it. And so I think the reason why I mentioned it, because why I think it's relevant to today, is that even today, like, there is this like kind of group of quote unquote black leaders who claim to speak on behalf of the black community, but like they're disconnected from the masses of working class black people. Like, if you were to consider Black America a nation, like, it's largely like a working class nation for the most part, if you're going to use that term loosely. Like, so these black leaders, like, they have access to white society, and they have like a little bit more money and comfort and privilege than regular black people, but they're supposed to be seen as representatives and talking heads for the black community. And so like they're the ones who get access to like CNN, corporate media, and like and these white interviewers are like, so what do you think about the riots? Like, what do black people think? And I guess like some talking head who a lot of times, like very few times, like has very little roots in the black community or even some sense of what's going on. And so I think Haywood really points out this divide that, like, he says, is the Negro movement mainly a bourgeois effort? So it's basically like, okay, like this sort of Negro movement that's emphasizing liberal integration, like, is it a bourgeois effort? Like, is it something that the black working class actually demanded? And I think he pokes some holes in it, and I think like you can apply it to today, because I think even these black liberals, these black talking heads, you and I, Peter, we've been talking about this like on and off record. Like they have no credibility, especially now. Well, like, there's no credibility. I don't.
Well, it's funny because it's like history, basically, like the past is never the past type thing. So, right. I mean, what he's describing is actually like the foundations of the problem now were forged in the 50s. He's got some really good quotes. So he's talking about the weakness of the black bourgeoisie. He says the Negro upper class came too late upon the scene of American economic development to get in on the ground floor of modern industrial enterprise, to share in the so-called benefits of quote-unquote free enterprise. The fact that the Negro nation is set down in the midst of the leading imperialist nation, in which there is no physically delimited national territorial market, has relegated the sphere of activity of this bourgeois to non-industrial marginal pursuits, basically like Madam C.J. Walker, right? Like you could sell, makeup and hair supplies, and you could run the numbers games, and, maybe, do little stuff, maybe own a grocery store or something. But you would never, it was just never allowed or even thought of to have like a black owner of a factory, right? It has never been in position to challenge U.S. imperialist economic domination, and looks to other channels and byways for its future development, seeking to accommodate itself to the overwhelmingly dominant imperialist bourgeoisie. This accounts for the fact that the Negro bourgeoisie has never raised fundamental demands for Negro liberation, and for the growing aspirations of a section of the upper stratum to become compradors, direct economic and political agents of imperialism, not only in relation to the Negro market, but also in regard to the colonial and semi-colonial lands of Africa, which is, wow.
Wait, oh, holy fuck. Let me find, so semi-colonial lands of Africa. Fuck. Oh, yeah. Damn, the split in the bourgeoisie. Yeah, this.
Yeah, no, I mean, he really goes all the way in, and then sort of I turned it into a PDF so I could paginate it.
Oh yeah, and highlight. Oh, I should have done that.
Yeah.
I should have done that highlight shit. But I have it online. But
but then he says, in order to maintain the suppression of the Negro people, Wall Street, operating through its enlightened liberal wing. One of the things he does in this piece is he repeatedly ties Wall Street to the Dixiecrats.
yeah,
which I think is very, very smart.
Oh god. Oh yeah, that was incredibly smart because it eliminates that sort of liberal notion that like, okay, the liberal enlightenment.
Yeah, the South is just this alien space that doesn't that is just
barbaric.
backward for no discernible reason.
Yeah, it's like the South is all racist and barbaric. But it's like actually no, the North had a huge role because that's actually like like two things like 'cause to hammer that point about the connection between Wall Street and the South and how it plays into this economy is that the South is where like the raw materials were produced. So that's where you had like the cotton and all the cash crops cultivated by black labor, first as slaves and then as sharecroppers. But the finance capital was always in the North. And even Wall Street, we've said before, like insurance started from the slave trade. Wall Street was a slave market. So like all the finance capital of the slave economy, which was also basically the engine for modern day capitalism and neoliberalism, was all in the North. So like there's no separation between the economy of the North and the economy of the South. Like they're both intertwined. They just have different purposes. Finance capital is in the North and the raw material shit is in the South. But it's part of the same system, the economic system.
Yeah, and in fact, I often find that America makes a little more sense if you think of it as like different economic regions than try to understand it as like a whole national economy. Right. And in many ways, the South is like intentionally underdeveloped. There's a paragraph earlier on where he's talking about the South after basically when the 20th century hit, it did do some industrialization as cotton crops. Well, actually, the big thing, one of the interesting things is that like the reason cotton declined as a powerful force in the United States was just that the British found it was cheaper to grow it in Egypt and buy it in Egypt, and that was basically, why Mississippi and Alabama went from being extremely rich to extremely poor. But he says, as we stated in Negro Liberation, the result of the guiding strategy of Wall Street is that industrial development of the South is distorted and lopsided, geared as it is to the expediency of the absentee owners, rather than to the necessities of the region and its people. Industrialization is geared toward the extraction of raw materials and natural resources and primary processing of agricultural products. This industrialization, promoted by Wall Street, is kept strictly within the limits of maintaining monopoly advantages, control, and super profits, assuring the $4 billion a year super profits extracted from the special exploitation of the Negro people. So what he's saying is that like one of the key arguments he's making is that like the economic problems of the South of underdevelopment cannot be solved without a revolutionary movement for self-determination, and that though the South is still beholden to Northern finance capital, and this of course is why there's such resentment towards the North, and this was a big part of the anti-Reconstruction efforts and all that stuff.
I want to kind of pivot to, because there is something he said that like really applies to this whole race versus class debate, which like for years has gotten on my fucking nerves. But when I read this passage, I was like, I want to send this like every time someone wants to say
tattoo it into the brain of every DSA person and Michael Tracy and every idiot on Twitter.
Oh god, yeah, they should all read this, have it tattooed on their brain, and then shut up. So I'm gonna read like a couple quotes. I'm gonna read a couple quotes and then get to the final kicker. So this is like the first couple quotes, and then I'll announce the kicker. So he says, "The territory of the Deep South belongs to the Negro people. They have earned it as no other people have earned a homeland. So this ties into like, some arguments I hear between like Pan-Africanists versus like some reparations advocates, which is like, there are people who are like, let's go back to Africa, let's like, build with Africa, like, sort of a black exodus argument. And then there are others who are like, well, that's feasibly impossible, but also like we've earned some bit of right to this piece of America. Even if we're not indigenous to the land, like we've cultivated this land so much, particularly in the South, that like, hey, we deserve some equity in it or some stake in it, right? So that's what he's saying, like right here. Like the territory of the Deep South belongs to the Negro people. They have earned it as no other people have earned a homeland. This is the meaning of self-determination, he says, that the Negro people in full possession of their homeland have the right to decide the political future of that area. The problem we face is how to bring about unity of Negro and white toilers in the common struggle against U.S. imperialism in the present period, and beyond that, how to fundamentally solve the Negro question under socialism. Socialism can only be built on the basis of the complete democracy for the masses. Socialism must tap into the resources of the population and develop all human potential. This is leading up to the kicker, but this is a good line. Even with the elimination of legal discrimination and the abolition of exploitation, the historically formed inequality, the economic and cultural disparity between Negro and white will not disappear with one blow. The age-old rancor of the oppressed Negro will not disappear, nor will the deeply ingrained white chauvinism among the white masses. The Negro masses in the Deep South must have guarantees in the concrete form of political power to protect their equality. That's a really good one. But then it leads up to, I'm skipping a paragraph and I'm going to lead to this one. This is the line I feel like this is sort of like, I feel like this is the preamble and this is like the fucking just boom, just like right here. Okay, so he says, it is impermissible for the white working class of the U.S. to deny support to the right of self-determination for the Negro people in the Deep South. We have already seen the corroding effect upon Negro-white unity within the party since the proposition to withdraw the right of self-determination was promulgated from above. The opportunist sacrifice of the struggle for Negro rights, which is at bottom a capitulation to U.S. imperialism, has opened up the floodgates to white chauvinism within our ranks, and at the same time it has encouraged nationalist moods among our Negro comrades who question whether the white comrades will carry on a struggle for Negro rights. Boom! Boom! Yeah. Every fucking Michael Tracy, DSA people who are like, actually, it's class, man. Like, you shouldn't talk about identity. All these motherfuckers, you just have that shit. Just like, here, I'm gonna read these two fucking lines and shut up.
Yeah, he even gets even in like the beginning. He says the party's position was also a sharp break with the social democratic viewpoint, in which racist oppression was considered of no relevance in defining the position of the Negro people in the United States. According to this view, the plight of the Negro people was regarded as purely a question of class, the same as that of the working class in general. Thus, in the name of the general class struggle, it denied the special character of the Negro question, regarding the fight for special demands of the Negro people as divisive and tending to distract the workers from the struggle of socialism.
Dude, this is the same shit we've been fuck.
One of the great things about Marxism is that you start to get into this stuff and you're like, oh wow, they already figured all of this shit out like 100 years ago. Like oh man.
It's just weird because like a lot of these like white Marxists and like I don't even know if I should call them white Marxists because I think a lot of them are social democrats posing as Marxists, but they're the ones who are like,
I certainly haven't read Haywood.
Right, exactly. Who is like very Marxist and quoting Lenin. I like that he like there's a really good quote from Lenin he had. I forgot where it was. But
there's a few of them that I didn't know about.
Basically, like how Lenin was basically supporting the right of self-determination, how that can like basically lead to international socialism. It's like, wait a minute, these were people who, a lot of these people cosplay as Marxists or socialists, but it's like they're not even aware of the own literature that they say that they talk about. So it's like, Yeah, I just love that line. So it's like every time, because for fucking years, the left has gone in
yeah,
this goddamn back and forth on race versus class, and it's like, just read Harry Haywood, dude, and shut up.
yeah,
Just I don't even want to. I don't even like. There's no
so
point arguing. Just like read Harry Haywood and shut the fuck up.
wow, I didn't even realize he was this thorough. I mean,
right.
he's so incredibly thorough, and he makes an extremely good point, which is that when you have like revisionist bullshit lines, that leads to the problem of like white chauvinism in your organization, because then it is like, oh yeah, you guys take a back seat, to us who are like doing the real thing. And in fact, and if you have a actual revolutionary line, then you actually are able to make, everyone like struggle together as comrades.
Right.
And,
Right.
actually have, multiracial unity.
Exactly.
But the only way you get that is through an actual revolutionary line on this stuff. And that is what a number of leftist organizations right now don't, either they ignore entirely or they may give lip service to it, but then go back to like doing social democrat stuff, basically, without naming any more names.
Okay, here's the here is the quote from Lenin that I thought was good.
Yeah.
So he's quoting Lenin. We demand the freedom of self-determination, not because we dream of an economically atomized world, nor because we cherish the idea of small states, but on the contrary, because we are for large states and for a coming closer, even a fusion of nations, but on truly democratic, truly internationalist basis, which is unthinkable without the freedom of separation. So basically, what Lenin is saying is that like national self-determination, because I think what happens, and I was talking to Andre and I were talking on a Twitch stream a couple days ago, is that like oftentimes, because someone asked about Pan-Africanism, so like both Andre and I are explicit Pan-Africanists, and so someone asked about like what Pan-Africanism is, and this is some like balancing between white left circles and Pan-African circles is interesting because most Pan-Africanists are socialists. It's like amongst Pan-Africans, like the socialism question's already been figured out. It's like, yeah, we know capitalism sucks. The next question is how do we unify as black people throughout the world? Like that's the question.
Right.
But they already figured out that like capitalism is bullshit. So in some ways, being a Pan-African socialist is almost redundant because even Kwame Nkrumah, like that was his goal, is like Pan-Africanism under scientific socialism, basically. And so what Lenin is saying is like pretty much in line with like I think the understanding of a lot of even African socialists and Pan-African socialists is that like you can have self-determination for oppressed nations of people, but it's supposed to evolve into like an international socialist global order, which is like that's like a very galaxy brain take on things. And so and yeah, it's like even Lenin figured this out.
Yeah,
like he's like
yeah. Well, the thing about the Lenin quote and the thing about the Russian Empire is that it was like a very multi-ethnic empire.
Yeah,
and that one of the big problems that the Bolsheviks were trying to figure out was like trying to unite all these different ethnicities like under this common cause, while also being like, okay, but like if we have socialism, isn't it just going to be like Russians bossing us around again? And so they had to synthesize this understanding of self-determination such that like you can, nations can determine their future in a way that isn't, sort of the bourgeois, imperialist, violent, jingoistic nationalism we all hate. And that was, and the Soviet Union to varying degrees of success, instituted these policies, and Harry and Haywood was very specifically learning from those policies and applying them to the United States. And I think, other people may have other disagreements, but I think that that is actually an important way to understand, because understand like the racism question, because it's like everyone, there are, dozens of indigenous nations that all deserve self-determination in any revolutionary future. Black America constitutes its own nation. Of Puerto Rico and Hawaii, of course, are
right.
Deserve their own self-determination, but it isn't also like doesn't necessarily have to mean separatism. It doesn't have to mean that everyone's a sovereign state. I mean, people, there may be advantages to, still being unified under some sort of larger government. But the point is that they can, people can, those people can determine their own future. So he says, it is impossible for the working class in the U.S. to organize an effective revolutionary movement and advance to socialism without fighting for full freedom to the Negro nation in the Deep South. That is, to determine their own fate. This, of course, does not mean that the Negro people will inevitably secede from the U.S. and set up a separate state. This solution is only one form in which self-determination could be exercised. They may decide on an autonomous regional setup. But the point is, they will have both the right and the means, the state apparatus, to determine their future relations with the U.S. nation. Of course,
I also like, I mean, that ties into to the Lenin quote is he like, for coming closer, even a fusion of nations. Like the fusion of nations, that actually applies to Pan-Africanism, because Pan-Africanists are not like, there's no ethno-nationalism to Pan-Africanism, because there's, even within you have different groups of like Afro-descendant people. You have like look, even on the African continent, and this is what's made Pan-Africanism so difficult, is that like the African continent is literally the most genetically diverse continent. The second would be the Indian subcontinent. Is that like, you have a lot of different groups of people in terms of ethnicities and cultures, and Africa is the most diverse in terms of that. And so people who've been, like the Maasai, Zulu, Nubians, Hausa, Fulani, Yoruba, Igbo, like you have all these different groups and ethnic groups of people on the African continent. And then the diaspora is also diverse. You have, African Americans, but then you have also Black Puerto Ricans, Black Brazilians, Black Cubans, like Black Colombians, and we're all part of this sort of, I guess, larger Black global nation, if that makes sense. But like, we all have like our different things. A good analogy would be like Polynesia. Is that like, there's the Chamorro, Hawaiian, Maori people. They're all like on separate islands, but they're all connected under Polynesia. So in that respect, it's like, to compare it to Pan-Africanism, is that like, it's not like we want particularly separate nation states, but we want like basically self-determination for each like group of people, but like we're all part of like this one larger unit. And with the Lenin quote, the way it applies is like, okay, everyone, like, we can basically respect each person's right to self-determination, but like, we can still sort of share ideas in a democratic fashion, rather than like, I think with the 1950s integration thing, was like, okay, the only way Black people can get equality is by integrating and assimilating into a white dominated society. And it didn't really address the question of like actual white domination. And the solution to that would be like, okay, Black self-determination. So it's like, we don't want to be subsumed under a settler colonial nation. We want like actual real self-determination to determine our own future, and a means to do it. And segregation basically robbed us of the means from that. And also capitalism, I would argue, robs us of the means of that. But I think it's really interesting, like this fusion of nations idea kind of reminds me of have you ever been to like those Asian fusion restaurants? You ever been to one of those?
Yeah.
It's like they fuse, it's I mean, I don't know if
Well,
how good a metaphor it is, but it's like, you know, you have like Japanese, Korean, Chinese. It's like they all have,
yeah.
you know, their own thing, but like you can kind of fuse them together, but they're all kind of like Asian, you know.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like you know, anarchists are not wrong in like destroy all nations, but it is like you can't, you know, it's like nationalism is kind of like religion in the sense that like it isn't necessarily a real thing. I mean, all nations are kind of made up concepts, but they're incredibly powerful, and it's like you have to get rid of the underlying motivation for them. But yeah, a couple of things I want to make sure we get in here. What he's saying about really what self-determination means in the immediate sense, the way he's arguing it, and this is basically how I believe it too, is basically completely breaking the back of and destroying the remnants of what he calls like the bourbon aristocracy or the Wall Street Dixiecrats, basically the leftovers of the Confederate, you know, white supremacist, you know, apartheid ruling class, which still basically runs like affairs, you know, runs political economy on the state level in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, you know, most of the South.
I think of bourbon as like, well, I do declare that the Negro is inferior to whites.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Those, like, you know, the Southern, you know, we all know what we're talking. You know what I'm talking about, I guess. Though maybe you don't, because I guess actually a lot of people.
Southern ruling class plantation aristocracy.
Right, basically. Right. Those descendants and that wealth and that power still exists and still is dominant in Southern affairs on the state level. That's why like all these. That's why you can have like a state that's mostly black and a legislature that's mostly white.
Oh, good example of this bourbon class. Just to put a name, Mitch McConnell. Who's I mean he's born in Alabama. He comes from a family of slave owners.
Nice. Yeah.
So that tells you so I'm gonna pull up this just to really drive this point. His ancestors owned like 14 slaves. So
that's not even that much, you know.
Yeah. But that's Mitch McConnell's a good example of this bourbon class that Haywood is talking about.
But so at the time he was writing this, the sort of justification that the Communist Party gave for abandoning the self-determination thesis was the Great Migration, was the idea that, you know, because the Black Belt, the historically constituted black homeland, you know, was intentionally underdeveloped and subjected to, you know, any number of white supremacist terrorism, that, you know, people naturally left it and, you know, got jobs in the North and stuff. And therefore that removed because, you know, black people stopped being a minority, then that removed the basis for self-determination. What's interesting about that is that those trends are actually starting to reverse now because, you know, basically everyone moved to northern cities, discovered there's still racism. Then those northern cities deindustrialized and, you know, they're basically left holding the bag. And I think it's like something like 100, I didn't need to look it up, but it's something like 100,000 black people left Chicago, you know, in the past 10 years or something.
Whoa, wait, 100,000 from Chicago?
Let me look
as you look this up. I'm looking up Mitch McConnell's Wikipedia page, and I see his
200,000 African Americans have moved out of Chicago in the last 2 decades.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. And you know, they're moving in many ways. They're moving back to the South. So actually, you know, his thesis actually is more relevant now than it was when he wrote it, because that sort of, you know, that territorial unity, I guess, is becoming more constituted. So it's something to look out for. I mean, part of this stuff is situating yourself in the current material reality and conditions, And I think that's a big part of it, is that, at the time in the 50s and 60s, right, was when America was the, total and complete, world power. It was because all the other industrial powers had been like knocked out of contention because of World War II, and it would be a couple decades before they could be serious competitors again. So America was just, that was the best America has ever had it. And so that was the period when, it was like, oh, maybe we can afford to give them a little civil rights or something. But, black people did not benefit from that. He says, the larger, or where is it? Okay. It says, when these comrades and ex-comrades speak of direct integration, they can only mean that the perspective is for gradual and continuous improvement in the relative and absolute economic, social, and political status of the Negro people. Certainly, if this were the dominant economic trend, we would see during this period of protracted boom under the most favorable conditions an improvement in the relative status of the Negro masses, a closing of the historic differential between Negro and white. But an all-sided examination of the changes of the war and post-war period show no such trend. Quite the contrary, the past 18 years show a widening of the gap and a sharp deterioration of the economic and social position of Negroes as compared to whites. And basically what happened was, all the white workers moved up and, got moved out into the suburbs, and, black people did better, but they were just were taking the places that the white workers had vacated. And he says, a salient feature of the changes of the war and post-war boom period is this relative decline in the economic position of the Negro workers, which is laying the groundwork for a devastating absolute decline in their economic status in the rapidly approaching economic crisis. Now, it took a couple decades for that economic crisis to happen in the 70s, but that's exactly what happened, is when capitalism stalled out, in the 70s, and deindustrialization started to happen. Black workers in those northern and western cities, got hit the first, and, cue to, the Reagan era. And so what's important to understand is that he was talking about this at the, boom of the American imperial economy. Where we are right now is not nearly as rosy,
Yeah.
And and in that period, that was the period where white workers had gotten the most share of the benefits. Now it's like even white workers are getting squeezed, and
because the like, because I'm sure you and I both know well that, like, I think even because as we were talking with the DSA member a while ago, like, a lot of white people in the US, and I think this provides the impetus for a lot of activism behind Bernie Sanders, is that a lot of white people are downwardly mobile. So it's like their parents may have benefited, like got the most spoils of that post-war boom that Haywood is referring to. But now post 2008, like even white people can't get it. Whereas like with black millennials, like our parents really didn't benefit as much from the post-war boom as white people. But now we're at the point where it's like, wait a minute, like, I mean, like no one's really, like, you can't really say that like millennials as a whole are benefiting from this this sort of, post 2010 like gig economy. Like no one's been it's even though like black people are being hurt the worst, it's like we're all generationally kind of screwed.
I mean, that the basic social contract of America was that, like, just, keep your head down and don't ask too many questions about the empire, the system, and, eventually you'll get your car and your house and all that stuff. And when that's off the table, as we've seen this past week, I mean, everything is just, when the economy is in bad shape, just everything becomes a powder keg. But also,
Yep.
Back in the 50s, the argument against black self-determination was basically that, capitalism as a progressive force will eventually integrate black people into this economy, and so there's actually no need for any of this.
So I want to just make a quick silly point, just for the sake of levity. Like I'm looking at Mitch McConnell's Wikipedia page, and on his early life and education, there's a fucking picture of him in DuPont Manual High School's 1960 yearbook. Because he was born in 1942. So he's basically like
he's
on
not
the cusp.
even a boomer.
Yeah, he's on like the cusp of boomer, because like boomer started in 1945, so he's like on the edge of it. But like he just looks like he has no lips. He has like sort of a one of those weird like kind of World War II era Nazi style haircuts. And it's just like his current picture is like just looks like a fucking turtle. He's like, and this guy comes from that bourbon class of Southern assholes. Because he comes from a family of slave owners, and he's a perfect representative of like that very Southern bourbon elite class that Haywood is talking about. And also like he is very much against, and he's led opposition to stricter campaign finance laws. Even I mean, like Mitch McConnell, like he's a very perfect he's a perfect representative of the Republican Party as it is in the Senate, and Trump is like the Republican Party like its true face is there. Yeah, Mitch McConnell is like descendant of slave owners and the Southern bourbon ruling class, and then you have Trump, who's just like New York, like kind of fuck you money, I don't give a shit. Like that's the Republican Party. I remember like after George W. Bush lost, people were like, "Oh, the Republican Party's dead." Nah, they're fine. They're fine.
No, they're not. They're not going to go away. I mean, none of this stuff just goes away. Yeah. But back to I guess my point is that these questions, that period where integration was on the table was like the period where the ruling class could afford to be the most generous. Now that's not happening. I mean, that's not going to be happening. There's going to be more retrenchment. And so the question of being able to determine, for black people to be able to determine their own economic future, our own economic future, is going to become a much more important question. And it does relate to police brutality, self-determination, because it's like, look, if black people have their own state apparatus, I mean, certainly there's a number of, black nations that have repressive state apparatuses, like Jamaica, or, other stuff. But at the very least, like, if cops try to beat you up, it's like, or kill you, it becomes an international incident, right? Right. Now it's like, oh no, now the consulate is like weighing in on it and that kind of stuff, because it's like, all black people wherever they live would be automatically citizens, no matter even if they're not living in the South. So that's why I think like self-determination for all those reasons is should be understood as as a response to police violence, because it's like the cops get all that money and get all the cops are the way they are because they have to keep black population in a hyper exploited state so that they can survive, so that they can still be used as like the reserve army of labor to push all workers' wages down. That's a big part of it, and if we are capable of determining our own economic future, then we don't have to, then there's no reason to even stay in like any of those cities or whatever. people are not, can't get good jobs or whatever. It's so there's no, it's, I think that it's important to be able to think about these things a little bit conceptually and not just be like, oh, well, it's about reforming the police because, well, I mean, you can't really reform the police.
Yeah, no.
I mean, there's some things you maybe can do or not. I will say that I think cutting the budgets of police departments is something that, like, that's like an immediate thing that I think people need to, and people are starting to cohere around this because, in almost any city, it takes up at least like a third of the entire city budget, like, goes directly to the police.
Right. And also on top of that, I would also like if there's going to be any kind of like, I mean, because there's that whole revolution versus reform thing, right? And like if there's going to be reforms, like they better be good ones. And so I think like another good reform on top of cutting their budget is real community control of the police.
Yeah.
Like the ability of like having like a citizen review board that has the power to hire and fire police officers. So if there is like another George Floyd or a Mike Brown, then the police officers who do that, like they face serious repercussions from the community. Like that, I think, and it's I wouldn't say it's amazing, it's unsurprising, but it's like it's something that really should be pushed more, like especially if the Overton window is going to be shifting on the issue of policing. Like that's something I feel like could actually work. But
well,
it seemed like
that no police department would ever agree to that.
Right, that's the thing. Yeah, that's the thing.
That's basically a revolutionary demand. Since we brought up reformism, Haywood quotes Lenin by saying, reformism in general means that people confine themselves to agitation for changes which do not require the removal of the main foundations of the old ruling class, changes that are compatible with the preservation of these foundations. And he says, and then he says, it is clear that the revisionist position downgrades the Negro question, eviscerates its revolutionary content, agrarian democratic revolution in the Deep South, reduces it to a fight against racial discrimination, and places it in terms acceptable to the Negro bourgeois reformists and their allies among the labor bureaucrats and white liberals. And he puts liberals in quotation marks. It's long, but you should definitely anyone should read it because he does bring the flames in this one.
Yeah. I think I like your point. I mean, I know we're getting close to time, so I just want to mention this. I think your point about like particularly now that it seems like the American economy and empire, whatever you want to call it, like something about it is in complete jeopardy, like very acute, like crisis. And the thing I think Black people, Black America, should face is, how are we going to survive? And I think like the question of Black self-determination is even more pertinent. Oh my God, I'm getting ADD, but sorry. Like, so Walnut Creek, which is like this very white, like upper middle class suburb, in the East Bay area, not far from where I live. There's this very bougie ass mall, and I see there's a video of people looting the Macy's. The Macy's is very posh, and there's like these people just fucking looting it.
That's really funny. It's apparently Jake Paul was like filming himself like looting the mall in this Scottsdale, Arizona. You know what? If white people want to do that, if they want to do that to their own communities, fuck it.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of them are dressed in black and they have hoodies. They look like they look young. And then, so apparently Walnut Creek declares curfew after Macy's and Target loot. I just see that on Twitter.
Honestly, how is that Macy's? I'm surprised there even are still Macy's, really.
Yeah, I mean, like, the time I've gone to Macy's, I think it was before COVID. Like the Macy's, I mean, that Macy's, particularly in Walnut Creek is so like Walnut Creek is basically a wannabe Beverly Hills. Like it's basically typical sort of white petty bourgeois, but it acts like Beverly Hills. And so
But
there's
and
also a
that's
video.
not even where the money is in
No,
that
it's not
Bay
where the money
Area.
is. No, it's not. The real money is in like San Ramon and Palo Alto, like real like
And Marin and
Marin.
Danville, right?
Yeah, Marin and Danville, like for $1 million homes. There's this video of like looters fighting with each other over the clothes they stole, and then they're packing it in their fucking car, and it's like they're like news caught them on video, and yeah, I think what they stole is like this is like yeah, this is very
They
surreal.
stole khakis.
No, they're stealing like just like I don't know what the fuck. It's just clothes and shit. Like a trash bags full of clothes. Um it's funny. I mean like but actually this is a good example of like I mean my point that it seems like the American empire capitalist order is like the cracks are showing pretty acutely in front
Yeah.
of people. And so the question is for Black America is do we want to tether our fortunes to this system? And to me the question is like, well, there should be like some sort
Yeah, I
of
mean, at that point, when you phrase it like that, it's not even a question.
right, it's just like right, exactly. So the question is the issue is like, okay, we should have some sort of contingency plan for Black America if we want Black America to survive for like at least another century or 2 centuries. So that makes Haywood's thesis even more pertinent, is that like, okay, yeah, there should be a right for Black self-determination because we don't want to tie all of our fucking chips into this sinking ship, because it's like this fucking video seeing of Walnut Creek, it's like I'm getting some schadenfreude from it because as someone from the more working class part of Pittsburgh, it's like people from Walnut Creek always look down upon Pittsburgh, like on the working class areas, and it's like, oh, this is funny. People are looting fucking Macy's. But yeah, it's a sign of
Yeah.
the American late capitalist imperial order sort of shaking, and we're seeing all these crises convulge: the public health crisis, the depression, and policing.
Yeah, I think maybe let's go out on a great quote, which he is actually quoting William Worthy. So he says, a particularly telling analysis of integrationist illusions was made by William Worthy when he speaks of Negroes who entertain illusions about their growing stake of quote-unquote equality in economic, social order that is not only doomed but is a menace to mankind.
Shit.
By thinking almost exclusively about the winning of civil rights, Negroes are walking backwards into the future envisioned by the sophisticated conservative, namely a corporate form of garrison state bristling with external hostility and hated by all the colored peoples of the world. All the Cadillacs and mink coats of all the Negro doctors and realtors will be, in retrospect, an incredible monument to a smug integration of a quote-unquote minority of a minority into a society that, in the final moments of its disintegration, is now going berserk.
Dude!
And that was in 1954. So.
Damn! And so a nation now going berserk, the example of that is a bunch of kids looting a fucking Macy's in Walnut Creek. So and America on... Oh my god, I'm seeing on Twitter, like, because, here's the thing about Walnut Creek. There's, like, there's very few black people at Walnut Creek. So it's like, I'm pretty sure these are not black people. Like,
No.
Like, these look like maybe, like, white kids and, like, white passing Latino kids.
Yes, no, white people, please show your distress by burning down your own neighborhood.
Right.
Quote unquote parody.
This is, I mean, I again, I'm getting probably some sense of, schadenfreude because cities like Walnut Creek were always looked down upon where I grew up and still like Pittsburgh. So, but I think this is, an example of the American order in very acute, like jeopardy. Like something's just yeah. This is a nation kind of gone berserk, and we're witnessing it under Donald Trump.
Yeah, and it's just like I mean, it's just like liberalism is almost in total free fall at this point.
Yeah,
those I mean those deal making class, the deal making class, the the comprador class. I mean, they have nothing to do. They've outlived their usefulness. So
yeah,
I think what he's saying now is more relevant than it perhaps has been, since he even wrote it, honestly. So, history is a trip, man.
Yeah. I guess there's that famous quote by, I think it's Karl Marx, right? First his tragedy, then as farce.
Oh, I thought you were gonna do the decades and weeks one. I saw a tweet that was like, I believe it was, as Lenin said, there are decades when you fuck around and weeks where we find out. And it was definitely one of those weeks. It was definitely one of those weeks where decades are happening.
Yeah.
So we will come back, I think, next week, more, and breaking the whole thing down fully, but
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. Like, we started with this podcast because it's actually been like a couple months now in our podcast.
We started in February. Not intentionally. It just worked out that way.
Yeah, This is May 31st, 2020, that we're recording it. And man, at first we were talking about the election and all that. Then the fucking pandemic hit, and now riots throughout America, like looting and so
the real shit.
Yeah, we're giving you, like, when we say real Sankara hours, we mean the real.
I mean, we're trying our best to live up to the name,
right?
And we'll keep going until the government shuts us down.
Yeah. Hopefully will not happen, but keep your fingers crossed.
Oh. You guys will ride for us.
Yeah. All right. Peace. Stay safe, everyone, and keep the faith.
See ya.